Hello and welcome to the Silver King's War. I'm Michael Sievers, the writer, producer, and creator of this podcast series about my father's Second World War as a B-26 bombardier. Today we continue in the epilogue for Dearest Ones, the letters that our hero, the Silver King, wrote to his family throughout the war. It's May 1945. And the war in Europe is just days from its conclusion. Stanley and his guys, who are now still in Holland, are waiting anxiously for the news that there will be peace again in Europe. For the Silver King, much like March and April, May will be very busy. He will write often and in detail about the news from spring in Europe. And that news began on May 1, 1945. Dearest Ones, since writing last, there haven't been any new developments of which I can write. All of us are still sweating out the end of the war and waiting anxiously for good news. Unfortunately, the rumor of an unconditional surrender hasn't borne fruit. I was afraid it was too good to be true, but I simply can't understand what forces the enemy to continue resistance. They must truly be ignorant of the situation, and it's causing me, for one, very impatient days. I suppose I possess the same feelings as a man who is about to become a father, never knowing when the great event might happen. I do feel terribly lonesome today. This morning, 2 of the fellows left to return to the States. They had been my roommates since the first day of my arrival over here. One was my ex-pilot, and the other was the assistant operations officer, of whom I have previously written you about. We had become so attached during the many months, I feel sort of lost without them. They were 2 swell fellows and as good a friend as anyone could possibly want. But they deserved to go home after being here 14 months. Both were captains, too. In one of your letters, you asked for information concerning the whereabouts of Famby. I had no idea his father would write you, and I didn't want to write you about it. But since you know now, I can give you the whole story if you will take a look at my crew picture taken while at Barksdale. The boys with me are the ones in question. Upon arrival here, I was replaced by someone else for various reasons, and then one day the boys failed to return from a mission. No one knows exactly what happened to them, whether they are dead or prisoners of war. That's why they are listed as missing in action. I can't give you any more information, for that's all we ever know. If they were taken as POWs, their parents will be the first to know. I suggest when you write that you say nothing of this. Tell them you know of nothing more than what his father wrote, as most assuredly you don't want to build up what may be false hope. I received no mail the last few days, so I don't know if you're still in Chicago or what your plans are. Anyhow, I'm sure this will be forwarded to you in any event. I'm anxiously awaiting to hear all the details about your visit. A request: please send me an assortment of foodstuffs with stationery and stamps. I'm fine and thinking of you constantly, hoping you're well. Love to Ida. I love you and miss you, Stan. As you know, we began the King's May 1945 with the letters that he received from Jack Feste and Jim Famby about their being alive and relatively well and being captured as POWs after they bailed out of their flaming plane. The King's letter to his parents was written on May 1st, and the letters from Feste and Famby were written on May 4th and 5th from Germany, respectively. The king's advice to his family, of course, is to say nothing because really that's all anyone knows. As he described it, they went out on a mission and didn't come home, and they were listed as missing in action. But now we know that they lived and they were safe and they did make it home. And we also know that the king is getting exciting news from the States. His mother has been in Chicago with the family, and she writes glowingly of Margie's development. And of course, everyone is sharing the news that Hitler is dead. Stanley writes that the weather continues to be lousy, and he's very thankful for the shanty that they have. He's been reading quite a bit and enjoying the letters and listening to the radio, waiting for word on the latest news. He writes that every time there is a news flash, my heart jumps into my mouth with the expectation of peace being disclosed. The suspense and anticipation is terrific among all of his guys. And now that Hitler and most of his cronies are dead, surely the chaotic climax can't be far off. It's only the waiting now that is hard to take. We're still restricted, so there really isn't much of interest I can write. I'm fine and thinking of you constantly, hoping you're well. Love to Ida. I love you and miss you, Stan. The Silver King's waiting is finally over on May 7th, 1945. He's writing to his family from Germany, and deep in a letter of that day he writes, "It's a beautiful day, a real change from what it has been, and more than welcome. As I suppose you are, I'm sitting next to the radio, listening and waiting for the important announcement. I feel sure it will come today, maybe within the next hour. I know how happy you will be, and you can be assured my feelings will be the same. I can't describe what it feels like to know I won't have to fear the enemy again. It's something that has no words for it. It's more or less like awakening from a dreadful nightmare. And as I sit here, I thank God over and over again for His protection and guidance. So, before very long, I'll be on my way home again. It won't be tomorrow, next week, or next month, but one day I'll be traveling in your direction. Just be patient until then, and console yourself with the fact that I'm safe and sound. Please keep well and have a drink for me. Love to Ida. I love you and miss you, Stan." For the Silver King and me, as his storytelling son, May 7th is significant for us in a number of ways. First, of course, there is the end of the war in Europe. The ETO is quiet for the king. And 33 years later, on the same day, the Silver King will stand as my best man when I marry my lovely wife, Kelly, in Sherwood Gardens in Baltimore, Maryland, where Chester Wickwire performed the service on a sunny Sunday in Sherwood Gardens. The wedding party had gathered at our apartment on West University Avenue, just at the edge of the Johns Hopkins campus, to walk together to Sherwood Gardens in Guilford. And Guilford is the neighborhood where Glenn Martin built a house within blocks of Sherwood Gardens, where he and his mother would live for years together, ultimately until she died in 1953 and he in 1955. The Silver King, our best man, had been a marauder man. And as the war in Europe concludes on May 7th, 1945. We have reached the end of this episode of the Epilogue for Dearest Ones, the letters that our hero, the Silver King, wrote to his family throughout the war, and this is part 35. And you are listening to the Silver King's War.